Hello all. This video is going to be video number 2 for the endocrine system. In it, what I'd like to do is go through the hormones, and we're going to be doing 3 things. We're going to talk about where the hormone comes from. We're going to talk about where the hormone goes to, what its target cell is. And then the third thing we're going to talk about is the function of the hormone. So if you're following along on the PowerPoint, you can look at this slide. So this slide here has all of the hormones that you guys are responsible for knowing their actions of. I'm not going to read through them all. We're actually going to talk about them. But I did want to point out that a bunch of them come from the pituitary gland. So those are going to be pretty straightforward. In fact, I want to start with those first. So we're going to talk about the ones that come from the pituitary gland. So the pituitary gland is a little bit weird in that some of the hormones that come from the pituitary gland are not actually made in the pituitary gland. So if you look at this image, you can see the pituitary gland right here has 2 parts to it. The anterior pituitary is made of glandular tissue. The posterior pituitary is actually made of nervous tissue. So anything that comes out of the posterior pituitary actually is made by the nervous system, and it's made in the hypothalamus. Now there are 2 hormones that are made this way. The first one is called antidiuretic hormone, or ADH. The second one is called oxytocin. You may have heard of that one. So I wanted to talk about these hormones a little bit. So let's start with growth hormone. Growth hormone is just like it sounds. It's responsible for growth. In children, growth hormone is released in fairly high amounts because they're growing really quickly. In adults, growth hormone is used to do things like repair of bones and muscles and connective tissue. So it's coming out of the pituitary, and it's either doing growth or repair, and it's targeting tissues like muscle, like bone, like connective tissue. The next one we have on the list here is the thyroid stimulating hormone. So this is one of these hormones that comes out of the pituitary that is directly affecting another gland, in this case the thyroid gland. So the name is just like it sounds. We release thyroid stimulating hormone from the anterior pituitary, and it goes and stimulates the thyroid gland to produce thyroid hormone. The next one is also one of these hormones that targets a gland. So the abbreviation is ACTH. That stands for adrenocorticotropic hormone. So the idea here is this is targeting the adrenal glands. So this is stimulating the adrenal glands in particular to release hormones that are going to help control blood pressure and ion concentrations. So the target there is the adrenal glands. And then the last one on this list here is luteinizing hormone. Now, luteinizing hormone is one of 2 that we're going to talk about that are related to sexual reproduction. Luteinizing hormone basically causes the release of hormones like estrogen and testosterone. So it targets the ovaries, it targets the testes. The other hormone that's related is this one called follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH. Follicle stimulating hormone also affects the gonads, but it's involved in the release or production of gametes. So in females, it helps regulate ovulation, and in males, it helps regulate the production of sperm cells. So the target cells there, again, are in the gonads. Now, another one that's produced by the anterior pituitary is prolactin. Prolactin actually has several functions in both males and females, but we're going to focus on prolactin in milk production. So in women who are pregnant, When they give birth, they produce prolactin and they produce milk. So the target there are the mammary glands. Now the last one that we're going to talk about here on this list that's coming from the anterior pituitary is melanocyte stimulating hormone. Now we'll talk about this again when we do the integument, but the target of this are these cells within the skin called melanocytes. And when this hormone gets released, it causes those cells to produce pigment and it darkens the skin. And so that has an effect when you get sun exposure, for example. So all of these hormones that I've just talked about, they are released from the anterior pituitary. These last two are released from the posterior pituitary. The first one is ADH, or antidiuretic hormone. The target for this is the kidneys. And the job of this hormone is to basically tell the kidneys to not make urine. So hold on to water. So this hormone will prevent urine from being produced. And by the way, if you consume alcohol, the alcohol basically prevents this hormone from being released, and your kidneys decide to put out a bunch of urine. So if you've ever heard of the breaking the seal thing, which isn't really a thing, that's what's going on here. The alcohol prevents this from being released, and you make a lot of urine. The other one, and you may have heard of this hormone as well, is oxytocin. Now, oxytocin is a neurotransmitter. I'm not talking about it there. It is used here as a target for the breast tissue and for the uterus. It's used mostly during uterine contractions, so during labor and childbirth. It's also used during breastfeeding. It causes the release of milk, or I should say the ejection of milk from the milk ducts out. Now, there are a couple other hormones that I wanted to talk about. So I wanted to go back to this list here. There's a couple I wanted to talk about that aren't specifically from the anterior posterior pituitary. So one of them is this hormone right here, melatonin. So melatonin is released from the pineal gland. That's the only one we're going to talk about from the pineal gland. And its target is other parts of the brain. It helps regulate sleep cycles or circadian rhythms. The other hormone I wanted to mention is this one right here, thyroid hormone. Thyroid hormone is actually two hormones, T3 and T4, and those regulate metabolism. And what they do is they upregulate metabolism. They cause your cells to burn more energy. So the target for thyroid hormone is pretty much all the cells in the body. Now there's a couple of other ones here on this list that come from the adrenal glands. So these ones, cortisol and aldosterone, they both come from the adrenal glands. Cortisol is a stress hormone. It targets many of the cells in the body, and it is released as a short-term response to stress. It helps raise blood glucose levels, helps alter metabolism. The other one, aldosterone, is used to regulate water. So aldosterone is used to actually regulate amounts of ions in the blood, and so it helps regulate blood pressure. Now, androgens, those are just the sex hormones. So estrogen, females, makes females female. Testosterone in males makes males male. Now, the other two I wanted to talk about are insulin and glucagon. I'm actually going to do a separate video, short video, on those two hormones.